hours, a high only of 68 tomorrow. Right now, we're actually at 68 degrees in downtown Seattle. I'm Ursula Reutin.
Subscribe to us on YouTube for our can't miss clips. KIRO Radio 97.3 FM. News and talk, powered by the Pacific Northwest.
The Big Lead is brought to you by 3010 Weight Loss for Life.
The Dori Monson Show on KIRO Radio. This is The Big Lead.
Coming to you from the Carter Subaru studio and streaming on Facebook Live. Welcome to The Big Show. I've got a very unusual Big Lead for you today because I was researching all the stories that I knew I wanted to talk about today. There was an amazing hearing in Congress today about how Google manipulated votes for the last election. There's also continuing talks about the United States buying Greenland. And believe it or not, those two stories made me think of you, a listener to this show. Let me explain as we get into the Big Lead.
The Big Lead. Top story.
Okay, so let's start with Google. And believe me, I'm going to tie all of this together with you in just a couple of minutes. But there was a hearing before the Senate this morning. Dr. Robert Epstein, he was he's just a very respected academic. He is a hardcore Democrat, Hillary Clinton supporter. He is also a groundbreaking researcher on how Google and Twitter and Facebook can manipulate votes. And you've heard about, the left has been screaming for 2.5 years about Russia, and that proved to be a phony story. This one is very real. And again, the credibility of this guy, to me, is elevated because he's a critic of how they were manipulating votes, despite the fact that his candidate was the beneficiary of that.
You testified before this committee that Google's manipulation of votes gave at least 2.6 million additional votes to Hillary Clinton in the year 2016. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I want to make sure I understand. You personally supported and voted for Hillary Clinton.
I was a very strong public supporter of Hillary Clinton, yes.
Okay, but this guy has been researching for 6.5 years how these social media platforms can manipulate voting. And here is, a rather brief, not that brief, it's 1.5 minutes, him explaining how social media manipulated voting in 2016, 2018, and how that could explode in 2020.
If on Election Day in 2016, if Mark Zuckerberg, for example, had chosen to send out a go vote reminder, say just to Democrats, and no one would have known if he had done this, that would have given that day an additional at least 450,000 votes to Democrats. And we know this without doubt because of Facebook's own published data, because they did an experiment that they didn't tell anyone about during the 2010 election. They published it in 2012. It had 60 million Facebook users involved. They sent out a go vote reminder, and they got something like 360,000 more people to get off their sofas and go vote who otherwise would have stayed home. The point is, I don't think that Mr. Zuckerberg sent out that reminder in 2016. I think he was overconfident. I think Google was overconfident. All these companies were. I don't think he sent that out. Without monitoring systems in place, we'll never know what these companies are doing. But the point is, in 2018, I'm sure they were more aggressive. We have lots of data to support that. And in 2020, you can bet that all of these companies are going to go all out. And the methods that they're using are invisible. They're subliminal. They're more powerful than most any effects I've ever seen in the behavioral sciences. And I've been in the behavioral sciences for almost 40 years.
Okay, this is a doctor. He is a psychiatrist. He knows about how the brain works, and he says that it's the most powerful way to influence behavior. And he talked more about what Google actually did.
The number one financial supporter of the Hillary Clinton campaign in the 2016 election was the parent company of Google, Alphabet, who was our first witness. They were her number one financial donor, and your testimony is, through their deceptive search methods, they moved 2.6 million votes in her direction. I would think anybody, whether or not you favor one candidate or another, should be deeply dismayed about a handful of Silicon Valley billionaires having that much power over our elections to silently and deceptively shift vote outcomes.
Again, with respect, I must correct you. The 2.6 million is a rock bottom minimum. The range is between 2.6 and 10.4 million, depending on how aggressively they used the techniques that I've been studying now for 6.5 years.
Okay, so in 2016, Google, through very biased search methodology, they moved at least 2.6 million votes to Hillary Clinton, and it could have been more than 10 million votes. So the Trump landslide electorally, I know he lost the popular vote. He may have won the popular vote if it wasn't for Silicon Valley billionaires trying to manipulate vote totals. And I know what you're thinking. Dori, you almost always lead with local. This all comes back to you as a person, in a moment. But one of the other stories that ties in with all of this, in my view, is the notion of the president thinking about buying Greenland.
Essentially, it's a large real estate deal. A lot of things could be done. It's hurting Denmark very badly because they're losing almost $700 million a year carrying it. So they carry it at a great loss. And strategically for the United States, it would be nice. And we're a big ally of Denmark, and we help Denmark, and we protect Denmark, and we will. In fact, I'm supposed to stop. I'm thinking about going there. I'm not necessarily definitely going there, but I may be going. We're going to Poland, and then we may be going to Denmark. Not for this reason at all, but we're looking at it. It's not number one on the burner.
Okay, but we're considering approaching Denmark about buying Greenland. So how does this all tie into you? As I was watching these stories, because the Google thing, it's tough to resist such powerful forces. I mean, we have, these billionaires in Silicon Valley who are trying to control our minds, our behavior, our actions. And I truly believe this about the listeners to this radio show. I think that collectively you try to resist that sort of thing. Because if you just went in for, the way everybody thinks, the way everybody sees the world, this show would not be of interest to you because I tend to be a contrarian. And even the many, many people who listen to this show who disagree with me, you at least want to hear, for whatever reason, you at least want to hear a point of view that you disagree with. But you still are willing to hear it, just by virtue of listening to this show. For the people who agree with the points of view of this show, you're more free-thinking than most. You aren't controlled by Google and Facebook and Twitter. Because if you were, you would hate this show. Because this show, not by design, but just by the way my brain works, I'm a contrarian on most things. And groupthink is what Google and Facebook and Twitter rely on if they're going to control the outcome of an election. And by the way, for the far left, are you as outraged by Google, which actually did manipulate between 2.5 and 10 million votes in 2016? Are you as outraged by Silicon Valley controlling an election 1 billion times more than Russia did? Or are you okay with it because they were influencing it for your candidate? And that's all that matters. So how does Greenland tie into all of this? Well, look, Greenland, as soon as the idea was floated, it became a punchline.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, Greenland is a territory of Denmark, and the Danish Prime Minister said Greenland is not for sale. But if there's anything I've learned from watching hundreds of hours of Property Brothers, saying it's not for sale is the classic opening gambit. That means you're ready to go, yeah?
Okay, it's become a punchline. Trump wants to buy Greenland. Why is that so funny? Why is that a ridiculous thing on its face? If you just went in, because every late-night comic, every CNN show, every MSNBC show, they all talked about how ridiculous that is. Buying Greenland? Why is that funny? I mean, the United States, there was a little thing called the Louisiana Purchase. That's worked out pretty well for us. We bought the Virgin Islands that are now the U.S. Virgin Islands. That's worked out fine for us. Harry Truman looked into buying Greenland for strategic and economic reasons. It's not a ridiculous concept. But again, if you were a groupthink person, you have to just go, Trump, Greenland? What a fool. There's nothing foolish about it on its face. I thought he was goofing last week. But then I started researching it. I started hearing, his economic advisors were talking out about why it was a great economic and strategic thing to at least explore. If it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But we've acquired large pieces of land as a nation many times in our history. We bought a little island called Manhattan. I know, that didn't work out too well for the sellers. I get that. But groupthink, you have to just go, what an idiot. Critical think, that's worth considering. There's nothing stupid or comical about it on its face. And again, I think that that's rather unique for the people who listen to this show. It's probably a unique quality for you, that you don't just fall in with groupthink. This is the ultimate non-groupthink show. And as I said, that goes for the people who disagree with me on most things. They at least want to hear another perspective. And so you know what that was? That was my long, long way of saying, I love you. Up next in the Big Lead.
The Big Lead. Big local.
Uh-oh. Got a couple new polls out today in Iowa. They do this thing at the Iowa State Fair. It's called the Corn Kernel Poll. And everybody who goes to the fair, they get a little kernel of corn, and they just drop it in for whichever candidate they want. Jay Inslee, 66,000 people participated in this corn kernel poll. Joe Biden came out on top. Jay Inslee, 0%. Now, he got several dozen kernels of corn, but not enough to come close to 1% out of 66,000 people. 0%. Brand new CNN poll out this afternoon. Jay Inslee, 0%. He continues to spend millions of dollars on State Patrol detail so he can continue his presidential campaign. He just 2 days ago talked about, he's the one who said we should have a climate change debate. And finally, CNN said, okay, you know what? We'll have a climate change debate. Jay Inslee didn't make it because they don't invite people with 0%. It was his idea. It was his baby, and he's not invited. The one guy who's made his whole campaign about climate is the one guy who did not get invited to the climate debate.
You mentioned your donor threshold, but you're also polling at 0% in some of the latest surveys, which isn't enough to make the next debate stage coming up here. If you're not able to get on that stage, what's your plan for your campaign?
We just plan on success. We are experiencing that. Like I said, we've had this huge burst. We've had
this huge burst. He's planning on success. I was asking listeners yesterday, what's the huge burst? Did I miss it? And a bunch of people texted in and said, that's his bubble. So, yeah, Jay, and then I got this. You are going to love this. Listener sent me an email. Oh, you know what, Nicole? The bottom of this email cut off here. Here, let me find it. I got it. Okay, I got it here. This is from... Oh, it just says for Dori on the return. I thought you'd find this picture interesting. I happened to be in Iowa working over the weekend of August 10th and 11th. This happened to coincide with the Iowa State Fair and all of the Democratic politicians being in town. As you may or may not know, there's nothing to do in Iowa. I'm not very political, but found it odd that there were no ads for Inslee, no signs, nothing related to his campaign in and around the Des Moines area. Since I was bored, I figured I'd Google him and see if he had any speaking engagements. As a matter of fact, he did. And one was near where I was staying on August 10th. I'd never been to a political rally, so I was curious to see how much attention our governor was attracting. I went to the Grimes Community Center at 410 Southeast Main Street in Grimes, Iowa, August 10th. The picture shows you what I found. And I'll describe the picture. We'll post it on My Northwest. It's a big stack of arrows pointing to various rooms in the community center. The Blaker birthday party, room 106. Holmes birthday party, room 205. Fine family reunion, room 202. Overton baby shower, room 402. Governor Jay Inslee, banquet hall. Sharing a community center with birthdays and family reunions and baby showers. I followed the sign to the room, which had less than a dozen retired people waiting for him to arrive. There were also a couple staffers outside putting up Inslee signs prior to his arrival. I waited for a few minutes past the start time, and Mr. Inslee was running late, so I left. Initially, I found the sign funny, but the more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became. The sort of effort wouldn't be acceptable for a high school ASB presidential run, yet our governor is spending millions of dollars and ignoring our state, and this is the effort he's putting toward his campaign? Time for him to call it quits. Sincerely, a friend of the show. So, thank you for sending the sign. You got to see it. We will post it on mynorthwest.com. It's just precious. And that is your big lead for today.
The Big Lead on KIRO Radio.
Hey, remember about a month ago when we found out that King County had been scammed in what was essentially a big phishing campaign? They'd been scammed out of more than $200,000. Well, now the city of Ellensburg has been scammed out of $185,000. How are these cyber criminals doing it? We're going to talk to the director of finance for the city of Ellensburg to tell us what in the world happened. That's next on the Dori Monson Show.